Judge Leonard Hatch sentenced Marcus Webb, 24 years old, first-time offender, charged with misdemeanor disorderly conduct after a confrontation at a parking garage in Memphis, Tennessee, in which Marcus had been the one who called the police, to 30 days in the Shelby County Correctional Center, a sentence 3 times the standard for the charge. And then said, from the bench, into the court record, into the microphone, to a young man standing before him in a pressed shirt his mother had ironed that morning, "Son, I hope this teaches you that where you come from determines where you end up." The court clerk stopped typing. The defense attorney said, "Your Honor." The judge said, "The record stands." Marcus Webb walked out of that courtroom to a 30-day sentence for a conviction that the Tennessee Judicial Conduct Commission, after reviewing the dashcam footage, the court transcript, and the judge's sentencing record across the previous 4 years, would later describe as one of the most clearly documented cases of racially motivated judicial misconduct in the commission's history. 18 months after that courtroom, Marcus Webb stood at the Family Feud podium in Atlanta with his mother Claudette beside him, and Steve Harvey looked at the two of them and said, "Tell me everything." What Marcus told him, in a voice that was 25 years old and had already learned things a person should not have to learn at 25, would be seen by 372 million people. End Leonard Hatch's 22-year judicial career, and produce a piece of legislation that now bears a name. It was a Wednesday afternoon in June, 18 months after the sentencing, when the Webb family walked onto the Family Feud stage in Atlanta. Marcus, 25 now, had the quiet, exact posture of a young man who has learned that rooms can turn against you without warning, and has decided to take up space carefully and precisely rather than not at all. His mother Claudette was beside him, 51, a hospital unit coordinator who had spent 18 months doing what mothers do when the system has injured their child. Everything. His attorney Priya Mehta was in the family section, along with Marcus's uncle Jerome and his cousin Deshaun. Steve made his warm-up pass and landed on Claudette. He said, "Ma'am." "What do you do?" She said, "I take care of people." He said, "What kind?" She said, "Any kind that needs it." He said, "Including your son?" She said, "Especially." Something moved in the room. Not applause, not quite laughter, just a shift. The way a room shifts when two people have said something entirely true to each other in public. Marcus smiled at the right moments during the warm-up. He was very good at it now, at performing normalcy, at being present in rooms that required him to be easy and accessible, at not letting the 30 days or the courtroom or the judge's words or the 18 months of everything that followed show on his face in places where showing it would cost him more than he could afford. Priya watched him from the family section the way she had watched him for 18 months, with the focused attention of a woman who had spent her career reading the gap between what people said and what they had been through, and who had, in Marcus Webb's case, seen one of the widest gaps of her professional life. She had also, in those 18 months, helped him close it. Nobody in the studio knew the full story yet. But that wasn't even the part that would make Steve Harvey press both palms on the podium and close his eyes. Marcus had been at the parking garage on a Tuesday evening in November, 2 years before the taping. He had come out of a restaurant with his girlfriend Aaliyah to find a man blocking his car and shouting at Aaliyah about where she had parked. Marcus had positioned himself between Aaliyah and the man. He had said, "Sir, we're going to leave now. Can you step back?" The man had not stepped back. Marcus had taken out his phone and called 911. He had stayed on the line. He had described the situation to the dispatcher, who had noted in the call log that Marcus was calm and cooperative. The police had arrived. They had spoken to both men. They had determined that the other man, a 52-year-old named Gary Stokes, had initiated the confrontation. They had cited Gary Stokes for public disturbance. They had also, for reasons that Priya would spend 6 months documenting, cited Marcus Webb for the same charge. Marcus had appeared in court 31 days later, expecting what the public defender he had been assigned had told him to expect: a fine, possibly community service, a resolved misdemeanor. He had worn the pressed shirt. He had sat in the courtroom for 4 hours while other cases were heard. When his case was called, he had stood at the defendant's table. Judge Leonard Hatch had reviewed the file. He had asked Marcus 2 questions: where he worked and where he lived. Marcus had answered both. He had worked at a logistics company. He had lived with his mother in the Binghamton neighborhood. Judge Hatch had looked at him over his glasses and said the thing he said. And then he had sentenced him. The defense attorney, not Priya, the public defender who had been with Marcus for all of 30 minutes before the hearing, had said, "Your Honor, the sentencing guidelines for a first offense misdemeanor disorderly conduct are," the judge had said, "I'm familiar with the guidelines." Counsel. The sentence stands. Marcus had stood at the defendant's table and understood, in the particular comprehensive way that you understand something when a person in authority says it directly from a bench into a court record, exactly what had just happened to him. He did not cry in the courtroom. He did not raise his voice. He looked at the judge. He said, "Yes, sir." He was processed. He served 22 of the 30 days before his case was flagged by a law student intern at the Tennessee Innocence Project, who had been reviewing sentencing disparities in Shelby County courts as part of a research project. The intern brought it to a supervising attorney. The supervising attorney called Priya Mehta. Priya called Claudette. Claudette called Marcus. Marcus was in his 8th day of the sentence when Claudette told him someone was looking at his case. He said, "How bad is it?" She said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I mean, is it bad enough that someone is actually looking?" She said, "It's bad enough." He said, "Okay." He said, "Mom, I'm fine." She said, "I know." She did not believe the fine. She kept working. Priya filed a motion for sentence review within 8 days of receiving the case. She also filed a formal complaint with the Tennessee Judicial Conduct Commission, attaching the court transcript, the dashcam footage from the parking garage, the 911 call log, the original citation reports for both Marcus and Gary Stokes, and a statistical analysis prepared by a professor at the University of Memphis School of Law, showing that Judge Leonard Hatch's sentencing in misdemeanor cases involving black defendants was on average 2,008 times more severe than his sentencing in identical cases involving white defendants over the preceding 4 years. She submitted 87 pages of documentation. The commission opened an investigation. Marcus served 22 days. He was released on a modified sentence while the appeal was pending. He went home. He sat in his mother's kitchen for a while. Claudette made him dinner. He told her, "I said yes, sir, to a man who did that." She said, "Because you were smart enough to survive the room." He said, "I shouldn't have had to survive it." She said, "No, you shouldn't have." She put food in front of him. She said, "Eat." He ate. He told Aaliyah that evening. She had been at the courthouse every day he had been in. She had sat in the gallery. She had not cried in the gallery because she had decided crying in the gallery was going to cost her something she needed for later. She had cried at home. When Marcus was released, she had been in the parking lot of the correctional center, and she had said, "Marcus." He had said, "I know." She had said, "What do you need?" He had said, "Food, and someone who isn't going to ask me how I'm doing." She had said, "I'll feed you, and we'll talk about baseball." He had said, "I don't follow baseball." She had said, Neither do I. But it's better than how are you doing? He had laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in 22 days. She had noted the date. He told their daughter, the daughter Aaliyah did not know yet that she was carrying at the time of the sentencing, who was now 7 months old, and in Aaliyah's arms in the family section at the Family Feud taping. Nothing. The daughter could not yet receive information. Her name was Grace. She had been named before either of her parents thought about the irony of naming a child Grace in the year that justice had taken 22 days to extend none. Steve Harvey would later say that Marcus Webb's "yes, sir" was the most expensive 2 words he had ever heard on his stage. The game was in the second round when Steve Harvey looked at Marcus and said, "You've been holding something since you walked in. I can see it." "What is it?" Marcus looked at his mother. She nodded once. He told the story. He told it in the flat, factual voice of someone who has told it many times in legal contexts and has learned that emotion does not add weight to facts that are already heavy. He said the words Judge Hatch had said. He said them verbatim, word for word, into the Family Feud microphone, and the studio went completely silent in the way that a room goes silent when a true thing lands in it from a very great height. He said, "I said yes, sir, because surviving the room was the only option I had." He stopped. He said, "He's been removed from the bench. His decisions are under formal review." Priya, my attorney, spent 6 months building the case. He looked at Priya in the family section. He said, "She did it for free. 300 people did not move. Even the crew members had stopped what they were doing." Steve Harvey placed both palms flat on the podium. He closed his eyes. He stood that way for 9 seconds. When he opened them, he said, "Cut everything. No game. This room, right now, and this young man." A producer stepped forward. Steve held up his hand with a finality that stopped everyone. He said, "This has never happened in the 45-year history of this show. A young man standing at my podium and saying yes, sir, to a judge who sentenced him for surviving a parking garage. This has never happened." He paused. He said, "Let me tell you something. An old man at a gas station once told me that God's got a plan bigger than your pain. I held on to that because I needed something to hold." Marcus Webb walked into a courtroom in a pressed shirt his mother ironed and said yes, sir, to a man who tried to tell him where he'd end up, and then he got out of there and let Priya Mehta build 87 pages that took that man off the bench. He stopped. He looked at Marcus directly. He said, "Justice lives. Right here." Now, he said it to Marcus, and to the cameras, and to everyone who had ever been told by a room where they'd end up. He wasn't done. He pulled out his phone on the stage of Family Feud and called his personal attorney. He said, "Priya Mehta, criminal defense and civil rights attorney, Memphis, Tennessee. I want the Harvey Foundation retaining her firm for a 2-year civil rights legal clinic. Free services, no income threshold, specifically for defendants in Shelby County courts who have documented sentencing disparities in their cases. Full funding. Today." He ended the call. He said, "Priya Mehta did this for free. I'm making sure the next 87 people don't need their attorney to." He announced both families, the Webbs and the competing family, the Johnsons from Nashville, were walking out with the full $20,000. The Johnson family crossed immediately. Their grandfather, a retired district attorney who had spent 30 years in the Tennessee court system, walked straight to Marcus and shook his hand with both of his and said, "Young man, you were right. He was wrong. The record now says so." Marcus said, "Yes, sir." He said it the same way he always said it, but this time it meant something different. The episode aired 8 weeks later. 372 million views. The hashtag #YesSirMeAntSurviving trended in 27 countries for 15 days. The Tennessee General Assembly introduced the Marcus Webb Judicial Accountability Act within 4 months of the episode airing, mandating statistical sentencing disparity reviews for all Tennessee judges every 3 years, with findings made public. The bill passed both chambers. Governor Reeves signed it. At the signing ceremony, the bill's sponsors cited the Family Feud episode by name and described Marcus Webb as a young man who survived a room and then helped build a better one. Judge Leonard Hatch's judicial license was permanently revoked 11 months after the Judicial Conduct Commission completed its review. The Commission's public finding noted that in 214 misdemeanor cases involving black defendants over 4 years, Hatch had imposed above-guideline sentences 71% of the time. In 198 comparable cases involving white defendants, the above-guideline rate was 9%. 3 months after the taping, Priya Mehta opened the Harvey Foundation Legal Clinic's first intake day in Memphis. 41 clients showed up. She had prepared for 15. She stayed until 9 p.m. She called Marcus that evening. She said, "We need a bigger office." He said, "How much bigger?" She told him the number. He called Steve's foundation the next morning. They got a bigger office. A year after the taping, Marcus Webb was accepted into the University of Tennessee College of Law. He had applied while working at the logistics company, studying at night, taking the LSAT twice. He had scored in the 89th percentile on his second attempt. His admissions essay was about the 87 pages, about what it meant to watch someone build a case with nothing but documentation and time and commitment. He wrote, "I want to build 87 pages for the next Marcus Webb before he has to say yes, sir, to survive a room." The admissions committee placed his essay in the school's archive. Today, the Courtroom Dignity Fund, established through the Harvey Foundation's Legal Advocacy Division, provides free criminal defense review, sentencing disparity analysis, and judicial misconduct reporting support for defendants in Shelby County's 7 neighboring counties, and through a partner network in 22 counties across Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama. Its motto, taken from what Marcus told Steve backstage when Steve asked him what he wanted the world to understand about his story, is, "Surviving the room is not the same as justice. We deserve both." The fund has reviewed 1,840 cases, identified disparity patterns in 341 of them, and contributed to 28 formal judicial conduct referrals. Steve spoke about Marcus in an interview the following spring. He said, "Yes, sir, to survive." And then he walked out of there and let someone build 87 pages. And then he applied to law school. That is 3 acts of courage in 18 months. I've been on this earth a long time, and I want to be clear. I have never met a 25-year-old with more in him than Marcus Webb. The judge told him where he'd end up. Marcus is ending up in law school. The record now says so. 2 years after the taping, Grace Webb, now almost 2. The daughter, who had been 7 months old in Aaliyah's arms in the family section, developed an opinion about everything, including hats, which she felt strongly should be worn sideways, and the color of her cereal bowl, and which parent was responsible for reading her bedtime stories, which she had assigned exclusively to Marcus for reasons she had not explained and did not need to. Marcus read to her every night. The books were simple, 4 words to a page, bright pictures, the kind of story where the right thing happens at the end, because that is how stories for children go. He read them, and she listened, and neither of them thought, during these stories, about courtrooms or pressed shirts or 30 days or, "Yes, sir." They thought about bears and buttons and what the moon looked like, and whether the dog in the picture was happy. Grace had decided the dog was always happy. Marcus had decided she was right. If Marcus's 87 pages and Priya's 6 months moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to know that documentation is justice's most powerful tool. Do you know someone whose case deserves a second look? Let us know in the comments. And ring that notification bell for more stories that prove the record can be corrected and that the correction is always worth fighting for.